Welcome to quiz class, everyone. Today we have a 100 question general knowledge quiz on the 1960s. And let's begin. Which slang term meant great, fine, or hip in the swinging 60s? Brilliant or sick, groovy or ace, wonderful or cool? Groovy or ace? Question 2. What did persistent nonviolent sit-ins achieve in the US in the 1960s? The Civil Rights Act of 1964, nothing of any consequence, or desegregation? Desegregation. Which two-piece swimming costume became a must-have item for 60s teenagers after it was featured in the 1963 movie Beach Party? The bikini, the monokini, or the mankini? And of course, the bikini. Which actress had the enviable honor of being the first star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame? Fay Wray, Joanne Woodward, or Teresa Wright? Joanne Woodward. Who took the 60s fashion world by storm as the designer of the irrepressible miniskirt and the Chelsea look? Mary Quant, Cilla McCartney, or Vivienne Westwood? Mary Quant. What is the name given to the way the youth upended the cultural and political landscape of the 60s? The earthquake, the youthquake, or the teen typhoon? The youthquake. Extolled as the face of 1966, whose signature look included their skinny frame, a pixie haircut, and 3 layers of false eyelashes? Twiggy, Kate Moss, or Linda Morand? Twiggy. Why did the United States wade into the Vietnam War? Vietnam purportedly attacked US warships, to put in place a democratic government, or to save South Vietnam from communism? To save South Vietnam from communism. Which book is singled out as the one that kindled the second wave of feminism in white middle-class college-educated women in 1962? The Handmaid's Tale, The Feminine Mystique, or Our Bodies, Ourselves? The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. Who said, "I've wrestled with alligators, I've tussled with a whale, I done handcuff lightning and throw thunder in jail"? Mike Tyson, Crocodile Dundee, or Muhammad Ali? Muhammad Ali. Who was born in 1961? Taylor Swift and Selena Gomez, Kenneth Branagh and Hugh Grant, or Barack Obama and Diana Spencer, excuse me. Barack Obama and Diana Spencer. Who became the world heavyweight boxing champion in Miami Beach, Florida on February 25th, 1964? Sonny Liston, Muhammad Ali, or George Foreman? Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay. Which 60s band was the favorite of the Flower Power generation? The Beatles, The Who, or Small Faces? The Beatles. Who assassinated U.S. President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963? Lee Harvey Osmond, Lee Harvey Oswald, or Lee Harvey Desmond? Lee Harvey Oswald. Who was the first Black actor to win the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1964? Sidney Poitier, Denzel Washington, or Jamie Foxx? Sidney Poitier. Which iconic event in August of 1969 was billed as 3 days of peace, love, and music? The Glastonbury Music Festival, the Woodstock Music Festival, or a Rolling Stone Music Festival? The Woodstock Music Festival. Who assassinated the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.? James Earl Roy, James Earl Ray, or Jim Moriarty? James Earl Ray. Which 1964 electronic device's invention meant we could perform calculations by hand? A quantum computer, the desktop calculator, or a whiteboard? The desktop calculator. Who won the space race? The US, first to step foot on the moon, the Soviet Union, first to orbit in space, or they tied? The US, first to step on the moon. Who was the darling protagonist of the Pulitzer-winning To Kill a Mockingbird? Scout Finch, Tom Robinson, or Atticus Finch? Atticus Finch. Which is one of the books that revolutionized thinking in the 60s? Invisible Man, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, or Atlas Shrugged? Slouching Towards Bethlehem, Joan Didion. Who shot and killed Malcolm X? Muhammad Aziz, William Bradley, aka Al-Mustafa Shabazz, or Khalil Islam? William Bradley. Who were Joseph McNeil, David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Jabril Kazan in relation to a famous sit-in? The Greensboro Four, the Fantastic Four, or the Central Park Five? The Greensboro Four. Which song's Louis Armstrong version was on the Hot 100 list for 22 weeks in 1964? Mame, Hello Dolly, or What a Wonderful World? Hello Dolly. Who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1962? Yasunari Kawabata, Nellie Sachs, or John Steinbeck? John Steinbeck. Which iconic tune came about through the combined effort of Ron Grainer, Delia Derbyshire, and Dick Mills in 1963? The Doctor Who theme, the Star Trek theme, or the Star Wars theme? The Doctor Who theme. Who single-handedly started a trend with her pillbox hat? Jackie Collins, Elizabeth Taylor, or Jackie Kennedy? Jackie Kennedy. When 1960s college students and youth stated that they would not put up with how things were, such as the consumerism and the Vietnam War, what happened to the US society as a whole? No multiple choice here. It gave rise to the counterculture. What is the name of the post-World War II rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union? The space race, the never-ending war, or the Cold War? The Cold War. What is the term for when a person takes psychedelics to expand their consciousness within a safe circle of friends? A love boat, acid rain, or acid test? Acid test. What were the consequences of the sexual revolution of the 1960s in the US? Nothing, as birth control was available. Abortions and unwed mothers increased, or the number of births and marriages increased? Abortions and unwed mothers increased. Where was the largest hippie community in the US in the 60s? Greenwich Village, New York, Community Heights, Chicago, or Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco? Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco. What was Beatlemania? A bizarre interest in Beatles, an obsessive love for all things British, or fans going literally gaga over the Beatles? Fans going literally gaga over the Beatles. What aren't the values of the counterculture movement of the 60s? Intolerance, orthodoxy, and support of the Vietnam War, free love, alternative lifestyles, and rock music, or yoga, occult practices, and LSD use? The first one is the answer. Intolerance, orthodoxy, and support of the Vietnam War. Who created the peace sign used by the hippie movement? The UK's Extinct Rebellion, the UK's Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, or the US's Association of Grass Growers? The UK's Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. What were the names of other counterculture groups in the 60s in Europe? The US Underground and YIP, the AU Underground and NOW, the UK Underground, Sponti, and Provo. The UK Underground, Sponti, and Provo. Who was the first man ever to orbit the Earth in April 1961? American John Glenn, American Alan Shepard, or Russian Yuri Gagarin? Russian Yuri Gagarin. Which ballpoint style permanent marker was launched in 1964 and boasted a plastic point, less heft, and the ability to write on any surface? Sharpie with double E, Sharpie IE, or Chirpy? Sharpie IE. What was the reprehensible name for the incident that East Berliners woke up to on August 13, 1961? Barbed Wire Sunday, Barbecue Sunday, or Potluck Sunday? Barbed Wire Sunday. What is the address of the fictional street that opened in 1969 to educate children using puppets? 123 Sesame Street, 321 Sesame Street, or 123 Simpson Street? 123 Sesame Street, Manhattan, New York. What does R&B music mean? Rhythm and blues, rhythm and bluegrass, or rap and blues? Rhythm and blues. Who is the grandfather of the Ethio jazz fusion that developed in the 60s? Mulatu Astatke, Getachew Mkuria, or Almehu Eshete? Mulatu Astatke. Which hairstyles were popular in the swinging 60s for women? Beehives, pixie cuts, and long hairstyles, bald heads, page boy and bob cuts, or chignons, perms, and wavy hair? Beehives, pixie cuts, and long hairstyles. Who was the first to escape the Berlin Wall on August 15, 1961? Border guard Konrad Schumann, Thomas Kruger, or Wolfgang Ambels? He did this by hopping across the barbed wire. Border guard Konrad Schumann. Which UK invention of 1967 transformed the world of banking? Online banking, the ATM, or the check? The ATM. What form did the humble computer mouse originate in before it grew into its current sleek, newfangled form? A wooden box, a mouse trap, or a mouse nest? A wooden box. Which act that President Lyndon Johnson signed in 1964 prohibited employment discrimination and segregation? The Civil Rights Act of '64, the Fairness Act, or the Equality Act? The Civil Rights Act of 1964. What had Neil Armstrong intended to say instead of one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind? No multiple choice here. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. What benefits did we gain from the development of satellites in the 60s? Commercialized space travel via the shuttles, number of satellites weakens communications, or weather forecasting, navigation, and broadcasting? And the third one is the answer, weather forecasting, navigation, broadcasting. What happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62? Cuba threatened to launch missiles at the US, Soviets taught Cuba how to build nuclear missiles, or the US threatened to launch missiles at Cuba. Soviets taught Cuba how to build nuclear missiles. Which new aspect of broadcasting brought the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and Neil Armstrong's lunar step to 1964 screens? The internet, color TV, or radio? Color TV. Which elite crew were John Glenn, Alan Shepard, and Wally Schirra part of? The Jupiter 6, the Neptune 9, or the Mercury 7? The Mercury 7. Which Marvy 60s hairstyle would be a huge draw to a swarm of bees? The pollinator, the fascinator, or the beehive? The beehive. Which historic act granted the right to vote to all Americans regardless of race, color, language spoken, or gender? The Voting Rights Act, the Desegregation Act, or the Civil Rights Act? The Voting Rights Act of 1965. Thumbing their noses at the peacock modernists, which 60s UK subculture wore trilby hats, too short trousers, and listened to Jamaican ska music and reggae. The rockers, the hippies, the hard mods, or the skins? The hard mods or the skins? When you chanced upon a mod driving a highly festooned Lambretta in the 60s, what would he be wearing? Frayed jeans and a leather jacket, an immaculate tailored Italian suit, or tie-dyed tee with love beads? An immaculate tailored Italian suit. What does the acronym BASIC stand for in programming languages? Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code. Where in the world was the first successful heart transplant performed in 1967? South Africa, India, or the UK? South Africa. Which masterpiece 1965 Nina Simone song had her thundering the piano chords for over 10 minutes? Strange Fruit, My Baby Just Cares for Me, or Sinner Man? Sinnerman. Which was the best-selling book of the 60s? The Feminine Mystique, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, or To Kill a Mockingbird? The Autobiography of Malcolm X. What is not true about women in the 60s? They started attending college in droves, they joined the workforce, or they became excellent homemakers. They became excellent homemakers. Which 60s psychologist and LSD guru advocated for the use of psychedelics to reduce criminal recidivisms? David Bowie, Timothy Leary, or Keith Richards? Timothy Leary. After the Summer of Love in 1967 and massive commercialization, what event took place at dawn to mark the end of the hippie movement? The death of the greedy capitalists, the death of the hippies' funeral procession, or the death of the bourgeoisie? The death of the hippies' funeral procession. What did flower power mean in the 60s? The power of peace, love, and passive resistance, the power of floral arrangements, or marijuana's heady effect? The power of peace, love, and passive resistance. True or false, the hippie counterculture movement normalized liberal ideas of peace, love, and tolerance, as well as the use of blue jeans, marijuana, and natural foods and fabrics. This is true. What did the 4-day Selma to Montgomery marches accomplish? Nothing of any consequence. Troops beat up and shot the marchers, or the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. How many countries rejected the British rule and claimed self-governance in the 1960s? Just one, 24 countries, or none of them? "24 countries." Where would be the most likely place to find a Yippie member? At a seance channeling the dead, at a rock and roll concert, or at a political rally or protest? At a political rally or protest. Which iconic 1961 Alberto Giacometti sculpture gathered a lot of attention when it was unveiled and sold for over $100 million? The Pointing Man, Gazing Head, or The Walking Man? The Walking Man. What does the 60s slang term "can you dig it" mean? Fancy a visit to an archaeological site? Do you really understand, or could you do a spot of gardening? Do you really understand? Which 1967 version of this appliance turned frozen food into a piping hot meal within minutes? The chest freezer, the rice cooker, or the countertop microwave? The countertop microwave. Who is a child of the 60s? One who's adopted the hippie movement values, someone who was born in the 60s, or someone who grew up in the 60s? One who's adopted the hippie movement values. Which car of the 60s UK was just as popular with the youth as the VW Beetle, the VW Microbus, the Austin Mini, the Daihatsu Charade, or the Toyota Corolla? The Austin Mini. Which impregnable island prison shut down in 1963 because it became too expensive to run? The Rock, Alcatraz, Fox River State Penitentiary, or Federal Penitentiary Daytona? The Rock or Alcatraz? Which type of music is categorized as golden oldies? Music that has sold over 1 million copies, music that is sold in golden compact discs, or very popular music of the previous decades? Very popular music of the previous decades. Who turned into a seedy slang for always taking more than his fair share of everything, such as a shared joint? Elton John, Humphrey Bogart, or Jimi Hendrix? Humphrey Bogart. What was the afro that hippies sported in the 60s? A type of colorful African fabric, a type of flowing African kaftan, or African hair grown long and voluminous? African hair grown long and voluminous. What was the street slang name for meth in the 60s? Benny's, Black Molly's and Ice, mushrooms and battery acid, or the focus powder? Benny's, Black Molly's and Ice. Which non-fictional book was considered the Bible of the 60s counterculture movement? The Greening of America, The Dust of Death, or The Making of a Counterculture? The Making of a Counterculture. What did Americans call the 60s collective madness over beat music performed by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones? The British occupation, the British conquest, or the British invasion? The British invasion. Which president did Marilyn Monroe croon "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to in May 1962? President Lyndon Johnson, President John F. Kennedy, or President Eisenhower? President John F. Kennedy. In the 60s, which type of apparel paired rather well with go-go boots? The miniskirt, the kaftan, or the spacesuit? The miniskirt. Were the 60s hippies political? Yes, they were deeply involved in politics. No, their message was just love and peace. Or yes, they were known as the hippies. No, their message was just love and peace. Which 1966 book was the most scandalous of the time? Lady Chatterley's Lover, The Satanic Verses, or The Valley of the Dolls? The Valley of the Dolls, Jacqueline Susann. What was the only type of teaching methodology used by teachers or schools in the 1960s? Chalk and ink, chalk and talk, or walk and talk? Chalk and talk. Was the 1968 horror psychological thriller Rosemary's Baby cursed? No, it's mere gossip. No, of course not. Or yes, the cast started dying. Yes, the cast started dying. What is the 60s slang word for marijuana? Grass, bread, or leaves? Grass. With this portable invention of 1965, people could finally record music and videos from the radio and TV. Cassette tape, compact disc, or the compact record? The cassette tape. Why were the 60s swinging in the UK? Everyone was spaced out half the time, society was going through a cultural revolt, or classic rock was created at this time. Society was going through a cultural revolt. How long did Bob Dylan take to record his debut album Dylan in 1962? 2 months, 2 weeks, or 2 afternoons? Two afternoons. Who was the glamorous women's band the Supremes composed of when Barbara Martin left the group in '62? Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, and Florence Ballard, Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, and Barbara Martin, or Diana Ross, Betty McGlone, and Mary Wilson? Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, and Florence Ballard. Which was Pink Floyd's debut acid rock album of '67? Waiting for the Sun, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, or Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. During the wave of religious counterculture states of mind, when was the Church of Satan founded? 1999, 1666, or 1966? 1966. Which 1967 bank robbery movie was cautioned for the extreme graphic violence and its murders? Adam and Eve, Bonnie and Clyde, or Mulder and Scully? Bonnie and Clyde. Created by Hasbro in the '60s, this action figure has the Army, Navy, and Airborne versions for your pleasure. G.I. Joe, G.I. Jane, or Nick Fury? G.I. Joe. What was so special about the 1960s Chatty Cathy doll? It could dance the waltz with a male doll. It was the first talking doll, or it could sing a dozen songs. It was the first talking doll. It spoke 11 phrases. What was the boob tube that people sat around and watched in the '60s? The TV set, a woman's strapless top, or an electric fireplace? The TV set. What is the more widespread title given to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech at the Lincoln Memorial on August 28, 1963? I Dream of Freedom, I Have a Dream, or Freedom at Last? I Have a Dream speech. How many times have movie stars Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton been married? 8 times, 4 times, or 2 times? To each other, 2 times. Last question. Who was the fab designer who fashioned Jackie Kennedy's out-of-sight pillbox hats? Oleg Cassini, Victor Hugo, or Roy Halston Frowick? Roy Halston Frowick. And bonus question, true or false? Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. Let us know the answer in the comments, how you did in general, and thanks for playing this quiz. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.